The day I collapsed on the kitchen floor, gasping for air while my vision blurred into streaks of gray. My daughter-in-law, Lily, was the last person I expected to hear screaming my name. I had spent years resenting her, blaming her for taking my son away from me, convinced she was the wedge driving our family apart. But in that moment when her hands shook as she held my face, begging me to stay awake, something cracked inside me, something I didn't want to understand. I felt her trying to lift me, her small body trembling with panic, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, fear of losing me. It didn't make sense. Not after everything that had happened between us, not after all the nights I cried alone, believing she secretly hated me. I tried to speak, but the words disappeared as darkness wrapped around my mind like a wet cloth. The last thing I heard before everything vanished was her voice breaking as she shouted for an ambulance. I'm Susan Miller, 55 years old. I used to hate my daughter-in-law, until one day, she secretly saved my life. Listen to my story, and if it moves you, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you won't miss any of my other emotional stories. When I woke up in the hospital hours later, the harsh fluorescent lights felt like needles in my eyes. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my ribs. My first instinct was to call for my son, Andrew. We had always been close, so close that I believed no woman could ever understand him the way I did. For years, I thought Lily stole him from me, bit by bit, argument by argument, silence by silence. So when I opened my eyes, I expected to see him sitting there, waiting, worried, ready to blame himself like he always did. Instead, it was Lily who sat at my bedside, her hands twisted together, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood the moment she saw me wake, relief flooding her face so intensely it almost didn't look real. "You're okay," she whispered, as if she'd been holding that sentence hostage in her chest. "Thank God, you're okay." I blinked in confusion, trying to make sense of why she was there, why she looked like she hadn't slept, why she looked like she cared. I tried to ask about Andrew, but my throat felt like sandpaper. She rushed to get me water, her hands gentle as she helped me hold the cup. Her gentleness irritated me. It always had. It made me feel weak, dependent, old, and I hated feeling old. "Where's Andrew?" I finally croaked. Her expression faltered for a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "He's on his way," she said. He was in a meeting when I called." I almost scoffed. A meeting. My son, my boy, had let his wife call for the ambulance, ride with me, sit with me, worry for me. A meeting mattered more than his own mother's life? But then I noticed the way Lily's fingers trembled as she set down the cup, the way her shoulders curled inward like she was bracing for another blow. And I recognized that posture. I had worn it myself throughout my marriage, through every disappointment, every broken promise, every moment I realized I wasn't first anymore. Doctors came in, talking about test results, blood pressure dangerously high, signs of chronic stress, a near stroke. I heard the words, but didn't absorb them. Not until Lily stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "They said you've been ignoring symptoms for a long time," she said. "You should have told someone." I wanted to snap that it was none of her business, that I didn't owe her anything, that she wasn't my daughter, no matter how badly she seemed to want to act like one. But the memory of her screaming my name, of the panic in her voice, was still too vivid. So instead, I closed my eyes and pretended to fall asleep just to avoid looking at her. Hours passed before Andrew finally arrived, bursting into the room with his usual frantic energy. He kissed my forehead, hugged me, cried a little, but it didn't escape me that he had been gone the entire time I needed him most. And Lily was the one who stayed. I watched him thank her for calling the ambulance, watched him take her hand and squeeze it, grateful. She shrugged it off like it didn't matter, but it did, to both of them. When they stepped out to speak with the doctor, I stared at the ceiling and felt a quiet resentment simmering beneath my ribs. I hated how she looked like a hero. I hated how Andrew looked at her as if she had saved me. I hated that I owed her anything at all. I didn't want to admit that maybe she had done something good, not after years of feeling replaced. Not after all the holidays she planned without asking me. Not after the Thanksgiving when she told me, not unkindly, but firmly, that she and Andrew wanted to create their own traditions. That sentence had stayed with me for years, reopening old wounds I thought had healed. When they returned, Lily sat beside me again, not asking, just quietly placing herself where she always seemed to be, between me and the things I didn't want to face. Her presence felt like both a comfort and an intrusion. I couldn't decide which. "Your mom needs someone with her for a while," the doctor said. "Someone to monitor her blood pressure, help with medication, make sure she doesn't strain herself." Andrew looked at me with worry. "We can move in for a bit, Mom, or you can stay with us." Before I could answer, Lily spoke gently. "We'll figure out whatever's easiest for her." I hated how reasonable she sounded, how calm, how sincere. I turned my face away, pretending to think, while hiding the swirl of emotions inside me. I didn't want her in my house. I didn't want to be in hers. But the truth was, when I had collapsed, there was no one else around. No friends, no siblings, no one but her. And somehow, that reality stung more than anything. I wasn't ready to thank her. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I wasn't even sure what I was forgiving her for. All I knew was that something had begun to shift, and I hated how quietly it did, like a door opening in the middle of the night, letting in light I wasn't ready to see. The days after my collapse passed in a blur of medicine, monitor beeps, and whispered conversations. I stayed in the hospital longer than I wanted, stubbornly insisting that I could manage on my own, even though my body refused to cooperate. Lily never left my side. She brought my favorite tea, held my hand when I shivered, and whispered words of comfort that I felt unworthy to hear. Each gesture, though small, felt monumental, and I hated that it touched me so deeply. I hated that I needed her. I hated that I might have underestimated her all these years. Andrew visited daily, bringing a smile, a story, a little gift from the office, but always with a subtle glance toward Lily, a silent acknowledgement of her presence, her role in keeping me alive. At first, it filled me with resentment. How could he be grateful to someone I had spent years mistrusting? Someone I had secretly labeled the enemy in my mind. And yet, as I watched them together, as I observed the way he looked at her with admiration and gratitude, something shifted. It wasn't just the mother in me who wanted acknowledgement. It was pride mingled with envy, confusion, and the bitter realization that I had been wrong about her. I had been wrong in ways I wasn't ready to admit. When I finally returned home, my body still weak, my limbs stiff and aching. The quiet of the house felt heavier than I remembered. The rooms smelled faintly of disinfectant from the hospital, and the furniture seemed smaller, more intimate, as if every inch of space was demanding my attention. Lily followed me, insisting on unpacking my bag, adjusting pillows, and even making sure my medications were lined up for the week. I wanted to protest, to assert my independence, but my voice caught in my throat. Each act of kindness was a silent accusation against all the times I had judged her, dismissed her, or been cold. I felt exposed in ways I hated. I wanted to be angry, but all I could feel was this complicated, raw mix of gratitude and shame. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the morning of my collapse. The panic, the pain, the helplessness, it all came back with shocking clarity. And then I remembered her face, Lily's eyes wide with fear, her mouth pressed into a thin line, hands shaking. I remembered the urgency, the determination, the way she didn't wait for Andrew, didn't hesitate, didn't consider herself. She acted. And in that action, she had saved me. My stubborn pride screamed at me to deny it, to push her heroism aside as irrelevant, but my body remembered the sharp pain and the fear of dying alone, and my mind knew the truth. I had been saved by the very person I had convinced myself was my adversary. I couldn't face her immediately, though. I stayed in my room, doors closed, pretending to rest, while Lily moved quietly around the house. She cooked, cleaned, and even organized my medication cabinet with a patience that felt like both a gift and a rebuke. I watched her from the doorway once, my chest tightening as I saw her methodical care, the softness of her movements, the way she seemed to anticipate my needs before I spoke them. And something inside me began to unravel. Years of suspicion, resentment, and unspoken accusations began to dissolve, leaving a raw, open space where understanding could begin. But it scared me. To admit her worth was to admit my own blindness, my own failings as a mother, a wife, a human being. The tension didn't ease overnight. I found myself snapping at her for trivial things, the wrong cup, the misplaced newspaper, the way she folded my towels. Each sharp word made me feel guilty immediately, yet I couldn't stop myself. I hated the vulnerability her presence exposed. I hated that she reminded me of how much I depended on her. And I hated that, despite everything, I couldn't imagine the house without her gentle order, her quiet vigilance, her unwavering presence. It was an uncomfortable truth that settled over me like an uninvited guest. I needed her, more than I wanted to admit. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the living room window, I found her sitting quietly with her laptop, reviewing something she had been working on. I watched her from the hallway, noting the concentration in her brow, the curve of her shoulders, the subtle way her hands moved over the keyboard. I realized that she had been quietly managing everything: my medications, my appointments, even coordinating with my doctor. Every little detail I had taken for granted had been under her care. And in that realization, the weight of my years of judgment pressed down on me like a physical force. How had I missed this? How had I allowed resentment to blind me to the truth? I felt an ache in my chest, a mixture of guilt and awe, and I didn't know what to do with it. The moment of confrontation came unexpectedly. I was seated at the kitchen table, absently stirring my tea, when Lily approached with a stack of my recent medical reports. She placed them in front of me, her voice calm but insistent. "You need to see this," she said. I looked at her, hesitating, feeling the old defensiveness rise, yet something compelled me to listen. As I read through the charts, the notes, the subtle warnings from my doctors that I had been ignoring for months, I realized the gravity of what had happened. The near disaster that morning had not been a random stroke of luck. It had been prevented because of her foresight, her diligence, her unwillingness to let me suffer alone. Every instinct that had told me she was manipulative, controlling, or cold dissolved under the clarity of that moment. I looked up at her, my eyes wet, my voice trembling. You did all this for me?" She nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "Yes, I know we haven't always understood each other. I know you've been hurt, but I couldn't let anything happen to you." The simplicity of her words struck me with unexpected force. Years of tension, of judgment, of silent conflict were laid bare and stripped away in a single confession. I wanted to protest, to say I didn't deserve this, that I had been unfair, that she shouldn't have done so much, but the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was stare at her, the air thick with the unsaid truths between us. And in that gaze, I understood something I had never admitted before. Love does not always come from those we expect, and redemption often arrives in the most unlikely forms. For hours, we sat in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle, and though the house was quiet, I felt a strange warmth, a tentative bridge forming where only tension had existed. The walls I had built around my heart, brick by brick, suspicion by suspicion, began to crumble, and I realized that forgiveness, like healing, starts with acknowledgement not just of the other person's actions, but of one's own mistakes. And in that realization, I felt the first flicker of something I had not felt in years: hope. It wasn't complete yet. The path ahead would be difficult. There would be conversations to have, emotions to navigate, and trust to rebuild. But for the first time since that morning, I felt that the journey might be worth taking. Lily had saved my life not only physically, but in a way that challenged every belief I had held about her, about family, and about myself. And as I watched her quietly rearrange my medications with the same care she had shown all morning, I realized that hate had no place where compassion had already taken root. The first few days after that realization were the hardest. I kept replaying every memory of Lily, every subtle gesture I had ignored, every word I had twisted in my mind into criticism, every time I had felt replaced in Andrew's affection. The guilt was heavy, like a stone pressing down on my chest. I realized that while I had been focused on my anger, on my pride, on my sense of entitlement, she had been quietly working to protect me, to care for me, to make sure I survived the dangers I refused to acknowledge, and the truth of it left me trembling with both shame and admiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the living room in warm orange hues, I found myself sitting across from her at the kitchen table. I wanted to speak, to finally voice the apology that had been lodged inside me for years, but my tongue felt like lead. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the history of misunderstandings and resentment that stretched back before Andrew had married her. I had built walls so high I wasn't sure she could climb them, but here she was, patient and unwavering, silently daring me to confront myself. I don't know how to thank you," I finally said, my voice barely audible. It was pathetic, inadequate, and I hated it, but it was all I could muster. She looked at me with a calm intensity, her eyes not accusing but inviting. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "I did what anyone who cared would do." I shook my head. "No, you did more than anyone else would have. More than Andrew, more than Mark, more than anyone who should have cared. And I've been so blind." My voice broke, and I couldn't stop the tears that welled in my eyes. "I judged you for years. I thought you were taking my son away from me, but you saved me." Her lips quivered in the hint of a smile, and for a moment, I saw her not as my daughter-in-law, not as the cause of my resentment, but as a human being with courage, loyalty, and empathy. I wanted to tell her everything I had thought, everything I had felt, every moment I had doubted her intentions, but I didn't. Instead, I let the tears fall, letting her presence carry me through the shame, the guilt, and the recognition of my own failings. That night, I lay awake in my bed, thinking about how fragile life had become. My heart still ached from the collapse, from the realization that I had ignored signs for months, but my mind kept returning to her, Lily, with her quiet determination, her soft voice, her patience that had endured years of subtle hostility from me. I wondered how many times she had silently forgiven me, how many nights she had gone to bed carrying the weight of my anger, and how many times she had quietly stepped in to protect me without demanding recognition. The answer filled me with awe and an aching regret for every moment I had wasted hating her. In the days that followed, I noticed the small things, the way she would make sure my meals were balanced, the way she adjusted the heating when I shivered, the way she quietly reminded me to take my medication. I watched her move through the house like a guardian I had failed to recognize, and each observation forced me to confront my own stubbornness, my own pride, and the bitter realization that my judgment had been clouded by fear and envy. It was easier to blame her than to face the truth. I had been too proud to accept help, too proud to admit vulnerability, and too blind to see the depth of her care. One afternoon, I found a folder on the counter with neatly organized medical information, appointment schedules, and notes from my doctors. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My hands shook as I opened it, and I realized that for weeks she had been managing everything, tracking my health, ensuring I was following the doctor's instructions, anticipating complications I hadn't even considered. I felt a wave of emotion that was impossible to name: gratitude, shame, admiration, and a sense of humility so deep it left me breathless. I wanted to call her into the room, to kneel before her, to confess everything I had thought and felt, but words failed me. All I could do was stare at the papers, recognizing the enormity of what she had done without asking for acknowledgement, without seeking reward. The confrontation with reality came unexpectedly one evening when I noticed Andrew and Lily speaking in hushed tones in the living room. I paused at the doorway, listening, and I realized how much trust and respect they shared. He was not just grateful, he relied on her, sought her counsel, and valued her judgment in ways he had never done with me. At first, a spike of jealousy cut through me, but as I watched her listen attentively, nod, and offer advice with quiet confidence, I began to see the fullness of her character. She was not just my daughter-in-law. She was a person capable of courage, insight, and loyalty beyond anything I had imagined, and I had spent years misjudging her entirely. Later that night, I found her sitting alone in the kitchen, quietly sipping tea. The house was still, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I approached slowly, my heart heavy with emotion. "Lily," I began, and she looked up, startled but calm. I felt a lump in my throat, the enormity of what I needed to say pressing down on me. I've been blind. I've misjudged you for years. I hated you for things that weren't your fault. But now, I see everything you've done. I see you." Her expression softened, her lips curving in a faint, understanding smile. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "I know you've had your struggles with accepting me. That's normal." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, you saved my life. You've been saving me, even when I didn't want it. And I don't know how to repay that. I don't know how to make you understand the depth of my regret, my shame, my gratitude." She reached out and gently touched my hand. "You don't have to repay me," she said. "Just let yourself be helped. Let yourself accept care. That's all I need." Her words, so simple and yet so profound, struck me harder than anything I had ever heard. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness, understanding, and love could exist even in relationships I had once considered impossible. The walls I had built between us, brick by brick, with years of resentment and pride, began to crumble. And for the first time, I allowed myself to see her not as a daughter-in-law, not as an interloper in my family, but as a person whose heart was capable of extraordinary kindness. It was a turning point, subtle yet monumental. The collapse, the panic, the near-death experience they had, revealed truths I had refused to see for years. And while I still had a long way to go to rebuild trust and heal old wounds, I finally understood one essential truth. Love and care often arrive in forms we least expect, and the courage to act, quietly and selflessly, can change lives in ways we might never fully comprehend. The days that followed were filled with small revelations that slowly unraveled the layers of resentment I had carried for years. I watched Lily move through the house with an ease that made it clear she had claimed a space in our lives long before I had been willing to acknowledge it. She was quiet but intentional, patient but firm, handling tasks with a grace I had once mistaken for manipulation. I realized that everything I had believed about her, that she was scheming, self-serving, trying to edge me out of Andrew's life, had been a fiction I had created to shield myself from my own insecurities. One afternoon, I was sitting in the sunroom, my fingers tracing the outline of the window pane as I stared at the garden. Lily came in carrying a tray with a cup of chamomile tea and a small plate of cookies she had baked. She placed it gently beside me and sat down across from me without a word, her presence filling the room with calm. I stared at her, my chest tight, my mind caught between the need to speak and the fear of breaking the fragile truce I felt forming. Finally, I said, "You've done so much for me, more than I ever noticed, more than I deserved." Her gaze met mine, steady and unwavering. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said softly. "I did it because you mattered. You still do." Her words pierced something deep inside me. a place I hadn't let anyone reach in years. I felt an ache in my chest, a mixture of regret, longing, and recognition that I had misjudged her completely. I wanted to argue, to claim that she had no right to step into my life, but the truth was undeniable. She had saved me. She had cared for me when I refused to care for myself, and she had done it without hesitation, without complaint, without expecting recognition. That evening, Andrew came home from work, and the tension between him and me, which had been dormant but palpable, resurfaced. He looked at me with concern, worry etched into his features. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked. "I'm better," I replied, the words tasting strange on my tongue. "And I've realized I've been blind about a lot of things." He tilted his head, studying me, as if trying to read between the lines. "About Lily?" he asked cautiously. I hesitated, then nodded. "About her? About everything." Andrew stepped closer, his voice gentle but insistent. "Mom, she's always been good to you. She cares about you in ways I never realized I should have. I think you're finally seeing her for who she really is." I swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "I am," I admitted. "I don't know how I missed it for so long." The following days were an emotional roller coaster. I found myself reflecting on years of bitterness, of resentment I had carried silently, of harsh words I had muttered under my breath, of the judgment I had passed without proof. Lily's presence forced me to confront the truth about my own limitations, my own inability to accept help, and the deep-seated fear that I would lose my son to anyone who seemed more competent or loving than I was. I realized that my anger had been more about my own insecurities than about her. One morning, as I attempted to stand unassisted, my legs wobbled beneath me, and I nearly fell. Lily's hand shot out instinctively, steadying me before I could hit the floor. "Careful," she said, her voice calm, almost motherly. "You can't do everything alone." I looked at her, frustrated, ashamed, and grateful all at once. I know," I whispered. I forget sometimes." She smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with understanding. "It's okay. That's why I'm here. You don't have to carry it all yourself." In that moment, I realized how much I had been resisting love, resisting care, resisting acknowledgement of my own vulnerability. Lily's constant presence, her unwavering support, forced me to confront not only my own mortality, but also the fragile nature of human relationships. I had spent years building walls to protect myself from disappointment, yet here she was, quietly dismantling those walls with every act of kindness, every gesture of care, every thoughtful intervention I had once dismissed. The shift in our relationship did not happen overnight. I still had moments of impatience, flashes of old resentment that caught me by surprise. But each time, Lily responded not with anger, not with criticism, but with patience and understanding. She never shamed me for my feelings, never belittled my fears, never tried to force reconciliation on her schedule. She simply remained present, a steady anchor in the storm of my emotions. One evening, I found her sitting in the study, surrounded by paperwork I hadn't noticed before. It was clear she had been managing not only my health, but also financial and household matters I had been too proud to delegate. My pride bristled at first, but then I saw the care and diligence in her work. She had been protecting me in ways I hadn't even realized I needed protection. The realization hit me hard. She had been silently saving my life, not just that morning in the kitchen, but in countless moments I had ignored or dismissed. I approached her, my voice unsteady. "Lily, I see it now. Everything you've done for me. I don't know what to say." She looked up, her expression calm but piercing. "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just accept it. Accept help. Accept care. That's all I ask." I nodded, tears spilling over at last. I felt the weight of years of resentment lifting, replaced by an understanding I had never thought possible. In that moment, I realized that hate and mistrust could transform into gratitude and respect, that relationships could evolve when given the chance, and that courage could come from the most unexpected places. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey we had been forced to take. The collapse, the hospital stay, the near-death experience, all of it had been a catalyst for revelation. Lily had saved me physically, yes, but more importantly, she had saved me emotionally, forcing me to confront my own pride, my own limitations, and the deep reservoir of fear and resentment I had carried for far too long. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where she was not an adversary but an ally, not a threat but a source of support, not a rival but a partner in the care and nurturing of the family we all loved. And though I knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges, with lingering doubts and moments of friction, I also knew that the foundation for a new kind of relationship had been laid, one built on honesty, respect, and the undeniable truth of what she had done for me. The weeks that followed became a delicate dance between my lingering pride and the undeniable reality of Lily's devotion. I watched her navigate the household with a quiet authority, anticipating my needs before I could voice them. Every morning, she would leave the kitchen spotless, the breakfast table arranged just so, and my pills organized with the precision of someone who knew that one missed dose could spiral into disaster. It was a kindness I had refused from friends, from neighbors, even from Andrew at times, yet she performed it without complaint, without expectation, and most importantly, without judgment. And every time I saw her do it, I felt the shame rise in my chest, clawing at me, because I knew I had wasted years questioning her intentions. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of her on the phone, speaking softly to someone I couldn't hear. She paused, glanced in my direction, and her lips pressed into a thin line before she ended the call. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I held my tongue. Later, I discovered that she had been coordinating with my doctor, arranging appointments, and double-checking that I was adhering to the dietary and medication plans I had stubbornly ignored for months. The realization was staggering. For weeks, she had been orchestrating a safety net beneath me that I hadn't even asked for. And the weight of that revelation left me speechless, because all I had ever seen was her as an intruder, a rival, someone I resented for capturing Andrew's attention and devotion. That evening, Andrew confronted me gently, noticing my silence at dinner. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. "You've been quiet since lunch." I looked up from my plate, suddenly aware that my own bitterness was isolating me. I'm fine," I muttered, but the words felt hollow. He studied me, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "You know, Lily's been trying to help you, right? She's not trying to replace me or take over. She's just trying to keep you safe." The honesty in his tone hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to argue, to assert that I didn't need anyone, that I had survived my entire life on my own, that I didn't owe her gratitude. But the truth was undeniable. I was vulnerable, fragile, and she had been there steadfast and unwavering when no one else had. My pride bristled, but my heart felt the pull of humility, of recognition, of something I had refused to admit for too long. I needed her. That night, I confronted my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked older, more lined, more fragile than I had ever allowed myself to acknowledge. And I realized, with a bitter clarity, that my resentment had been a shield against vulnerability, against the fear of losing Andrew, against the uncomfortable truth that love sometimes arrived in forms we weren't ready to accept. I thought of Lily, of her unwavering devotion, of her patience and gentleness, and I knew that I had been wrong, profoundly wrong, in every judgment I had passed. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Lily humming softly in the kitchen. I watched her from the doorway, her hands moving deftly as she prepared breakfast. For a moment, I wanted to retreat, to remind myself of my independence, to reclaim the control I felt slipping away. But then I saw the care in her eyes, the quiet intensity with which she moved through the routine tasks, and I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. I stepped into the kitchen, my voice trembling. "Lily, can I talk to you for a moment?" She turned, surprised but attentive, and nodded. "Of course." I took a deep breath, the words I had withheld for years threatening to spill over. I don't know how to say this, but I've been blind. I've misjudged you, doubted you, resented you, and all the while, you were taking care of me, protecting me, saving me in ways I didn't even see. I owe you my life, and I don't know how to make you understand that." She reached out, placing her hand gently on mine. "You don't have to make me understand," she said softly. "I never did this for thanks. I did it because I care, because you matter. That's enough for me." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and regret washing over me. For years, I had allowed pride and resentment to dictate my perception of her, and now, confronted with her unwavering care, I felt the walls around my heart begin to crumble. Over the following days, the dynamic of our household began to shift subtly. I found myself relying on her guidance, asking for advice, and even laughing at moments I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy in years. The tension that had defined our relationship slowly gave way to an unspoken understanding, a fragile but growing trust. I began to see the depth of her character, the courage it took to step into a family that had been resistant to her presence, the patience required to endure my hostility, and the quiet strength that had kept me safe when I was too stubborn to protect myself. One afternoon, as I rested in the sunroom, Lily brought me a folder filled with medical notes, schedules, and reminders. I looked through it, overwhelmed by the meticulous care she had taken to ensure my well-being. Every appointment, every dietary adjustment, every precaution I had ignored was accounted for. I felt a wave of emotion that was difficult to name: gratitude, shame, awe, and a quiet acceptance that I had misjudged her completely. I realized then that the person I had hated, the one I had blamed for taking Andrew away, had been silently saving me all along. She had been protecting me, caring for me, and loving me in a way I had never recognized, and I had allowed pride to blind me to the truth. The weight of that realization pressed down on me, leaving me both humbled and grateful, and I knew that my journey toward forgiveness, toward true understanding, had only just begun. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow over the living room, I found Lily sitting quietly with a cup of tea. I approached her slowly, unsure of how to begin. "Lily, I want to thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "For everything. For saving me, for being here, for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." She smiled faintly, her eyes soft and understanding. "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Just accept that someone cares. That's enough." And in that moment, I realized that love, care, and forgiveness could exist even in the most unexpected forms, even in relationships I had once considered impossible. I realized that courage could come quietly, without fanfare, without acknowledgement, and that redemption often arrived in the form of patience, dedication, and unwavering presence. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope not just for my health, not just for the reconciliation with Andrew, but for a future where our family could be whole, where resentment could transform into gratitude, and where I could finally see Lily not as a rival or intruder, but as a guardian, a companion, and, in her own quiet way, a savior. The following days felt surreal, as if the world had shifted ever so slightly, and I was seeing everything with new eyes. I noticed the little things, how Lily would quietly move about the house, straightening objects I hadn't realized were out of place, preparing meals that were both healthy and comforting, and checking in on my well-being with a tenderness that was impossible to ignore. Each act of care was a reminder of the life I had taken for granted, the love I had dismissed, and the quiet heroism of the woman I had once resented so deeply. One morning, I awoke feeling stronger, lighter, as though the burden of pride that had weighed me down for decades had finally begun to lift. I found Lily in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. I lingered in the doorway, watching her move with such effortless grace, and a surge of emotion hit me, gratitude, admiration, and a twinge of shame all at once. I realized that for years I had been so consumed with protecting my place in Andrew's life that I had failed to see the depth of her devotion, the courage it took to step into a family that had not always welcomed her, and the selflessness that had saved me from harm. "Lily," I began, my voice tentative, "can I ask you something?" She turned toward me, her eyes gentle and attentive. "Yes," she said simply. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. "Why? Why did you stay? After everything, after the tension, the resentment, why didn't you walk away?" Her gaze softened, and she approached me, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "Because I care," she said. "Because I saw someone who needed help, even if she didn't realize it herself. And because I love Andrew, and I knew that helping you was part of supporting him, part of keeping our family whole." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Her honesty, her sincerity, and her courage were overwhelming. For the first time, I truly saw her not as a daughter-in-law who had disrupted my life, not as a rival or an intruder, but as a person capable of profound empathy, resilience, and strength. I wanted to reach out, to embrace her, to apologize for every moment of judgment and bitterness I had carried, but my voice trembled too much. Instead, I simply nodded, letting the weight of her words sink in. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet transformations. I began to rely on Lily in ways I had resisted for years. I asked for her advice, trusted her judgment, and allowed her to help me without questioning her motives. Each interaction, no matter how small, was a lesson in humility and grace. I realized that the barriers I had built between us were unnecessary, that my resentment had been rooted in fear rather than reality, and that the person I had once hated was the one who had consistently acted in my best interest. One afternoon, I found a folder on the counter containing detailed notes about my medications, appointments, and even subtle observations about my health that I hadn't noticed myself. My hands shook as I flipped through it, overwhelmed by the meticulous care she had taken to ensure my well-being. Every detail was accounted for, every precaution carefully considered, and every action rooted in love. I felt a wave of gratitude, humility, and awe. The woman I had judged so harshly had been quietly orchestrating my survival all along, and I realized that my hatred had been both unfair and misplaced. That evening, I asked her to sit with me in the living room. The house was quiet, the golden glow of sunset casting a warm light across the furniture. I reached for her hand, my voice trembling. "Lily, I need to tell you something. I've been blind for too long. I've misjudged you, resented you, and allowed my pride to prevent me from seeing the truth. You saved my life, not just physically, but emotionally. You've been here for me when I refused to let anyone in, and I don't know how to thank you properly." She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "What matters is that you see it now, that you understand. That's enough." Her words settled over me like a balm, and I felt a profound sense of relief. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to release the bitterness and pride that had dictated my behavior. I realized that forgiveness, both of others and of myself, was not a single act, but a continuous process, and that the relationship I had once viewed as a source of tension could become a source of strength and love. The next morning, I woke feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I moved through the house with Lily beside me, talking, laughing, and sharing stories in a way that had once seemed impossible. I found myself appreciating the depth of her character, the courage it had taken to step into a family that had not always welcomed her, and the unwavering dedication she had shown in protecting me. Every gesture, every act of care, became a reminder that love could arrive in unexpected forms, and that redemption often came quietly, without fanfare or recognition. As the days turned into weeks, our bond strengthened. Andrew noticed the change, the tension that had once defined our household replaced by a tentative harmony, mutual respect, and understanding. The dinners we shared were filled with conversation and laughter, the kind that had been absent for years. I found myself looking forward to Lily's presence, not as an intrusion, but as a source of comfort and support. And I realized that the woman I had once hated had become essential to the rhythm of our lives. One evening, as we sat together in the kitchen, I reflected on the journey we had undertaken: the collapse, the hospital stay, the near-death experience, and the gradual unraveling of my misconceptions. I realized that my hatred had been a barrier to understanding, a shield against vulnerability, and that the courage to forgive and trust could transform even the most fraught relationships. I looked at Lily, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead light, and felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. She had saved me in ways I could never have imagined, and in doing so, she had changed the course of my life. I took a deep breath, letting the words flow from my heart. "Lily, thank you," I said softly, "for everything, for saving me, for being here, for never giving up on me. I see you now, truly." Her eyes softened, a faint smile curving her lips. "You don't have to say more," she replied. "Just live. That's all I ask." And in that moment, I understood that life, love, and forgiveness often arrived in the quietest, most unexpected ways. I had spent years blind to the truth, and now I finally saw it. The woman I had hated had become my savior, my ally, and, in her own way, my friend. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with the challenges of rebuilding trust, navigating emotions, and learning to embrace vulnerability. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again underestimate the quiet strength of love, the courage of selfless care, or the power of forgiveness. The turning point came one chilly autumn evening. The house was quiet, the golden light of sunset spilling across the living room, and I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I realized, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that my life had been saved, not just by medicine or luck, but by Lily, the daughter-in-law I had once hated with every fiber of my being. The woman I had scorned, suspected, and resented had quietly orchestrated my survival, and I had spent years blind to her courage and devotion. I remember sitting across from her at the kitchen table, my hands trembling, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lily, I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done," I said. "For the years of mistrust, of judgment, of everything. You saved me, and I was too blind to see it." She reached out and took my hand in hers, her touch warm and steady. "You don't have to make up for anything," she said softly. "I never did it for that. I did it because I care about you, and because I wanted you to be safe." Her words, so simple and yet so profound, broke through the last remnants of pride that had clung to me for decades. I realized that for years, I had allowed fear and resentment to dictate my perception, to cloud my judgment, and to poison my heart. But now, confronted with her unwavering care, I felt a flood of emotions: regret, gratitude, awe, and finally, forgiveness. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at understanding, at connection, and at love. Over the following days, our relationship transformed in ways I had never imagined possible. I began to trust her guidance, to accept her help without suspicion, and even to rely on her wisdom in matters I had once thought were mine alone. Every gesture, every act of care, became a testament to the strength of her character and the depth of her compassion. She was no longer just my daughter-in-law. She was my savior, my ally, and, in a way, my friend. One afternoon, I found a folder she had left on the counter. Inside were detailed notes on my health, appointments, medications, and even subtle observations about changes in my behavior and mood. The meticulous care she had taken to ensure my well-being left me breathless. She had been protecting me long before I recognized my own vulnerability, long before I had allowed myself to see her as more than an interloper in our family. And in that moment, I understood the magnitude of my misjudgment, the years of resentment, the harsh words, the cold stares, the silent accusations, all of it had been directed at someone who had only ever acted out of love. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the arc of our relationship, the hostility, the suspicion, the near collapse of trust, and the quiet, relentless presence that had guided me back to safety. I realized that hate and mistrust could transform into gratitude and respect, that pride could yield to humility, and that courage and compassion often arrive in forms we least expect. Lily had taught me these lessons not through words or lectures, but through action, through unwavering devotion, and through a love that refused to falter, even in the face of rejection. The final confrontation with my own heart came the next morning. I found Lily in the living room, her eyes bright with the warmth of the sun streaming through the windows. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice filled with emotion. "Lily, I used to hate you. I resented you for years. I thought you were trying to take Andrew away from me, trying to replace me, trying to... I don't even know. But now I see. You saved my life. You've cared for me, protected me, and loved me in ways I was too blind to recognize. And I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry." Her lips curved in a faint, understanding smile. "It's okay," she said softly. "You see it now, and that's enough." And it was enough. The weight I had carried, the years of judgment, the bitterness, the sense of betrayal began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I realized that forgiveness is not just about absolving another. It's about freeing oneself from the chains of anger and resentment. I had been imprisoned by my pride, and she had quietly handed me the key to liberation. In the weeks that followed, our household settled into a new rhythm. Laughter returned to the kitchen, conversations flowed more freely, and even Andrew noticed the shift. The tension that had defined our interactions for years had dissolved, replaced by mutual respect, understanding, and a newfound closeness. I found myself seeking her counsel, appreciating her insights, and valuing her presence in ways I had never imagined possible. One evening, as we all sat together at the dinner table, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known in years. The fear, the resentment, the pride, they had all been transformed by recognition, gratitude, and love. Lily had not only saved my life, but had also saved my capacity to forgive, to connect, and to embrace the bonds of family. I realized, in that quiet, golden moment, that love doesn't always arrive in the ways we expect. Sometimes, it comes quietly, persistently, without fanfare, without recognition, and without expectation. And sometimes, it arrives in the very person we least expected to show us what it means to care, to sacrifice, and to protect. I looked at Lily, her face serene and steady, and I felt a surge of emotion that words could scarcely capture. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for being here, for never giving up on me. I see you now, truly." Her smile, soft and knowing, was all the acknowledgement I needed. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Just live. That's all I ask." In that moment, I understood the depth of her sacrifice, the courage it took to care for someone who had once scorned her, and the transformative power of love and forgiveness. I realized that the woman I had hated had become my savior, my confidant, and, in her quiet, unwavering way, my guide. And as I sat there, feeling the warmth of the sun and the presence of my family, I knew that my life had been irrevocably changed, not just because I had been saved, but because I had learned to see, to forgive, and to love. And so I learned the most important lesson of all. Love doesn't die in betrayal. It transforms. And so did I. Thank you for following our story, a journey full of emotions. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more deeply touching stories every day.